Hello and welcome to Pardon My Disruption. I am Alan Berkson. I am the Director of Community Outreach for Freshdesk, and I'm joined as always by the Dr. Disruptive, Jonathan Yarmis. Hello, Doctor.
Greetings, Alan.
We are broadcasting live from the Stanford Innovation Center in beautiful downtown Stanford.
And yes, it's beautiful today. Really warm.
There's a lot of traffic too.
Urban construction.
So today we have a lot of really cool stuff to talk about. Apple announcements, autonomous cars, killer robots.
Although one thing I want to start talking about is our next show is October 14th, when the baseball playoffs will be underway.
Right, so we'll basically be watching.
That if the playoffs began today.
If the playoffs began today.
The Mets are a wild card team.
I hear the applause.
Hashtag LGM.
Well, you know.
Let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets. And since they've taken a page out of the Jets, out of the Mets playbook.
Oh, no, out of the Jets.
The Jets playbook.
Yeah, we won't go.
We promised we wouldn't say it.
That's enough of the. I'm not even going to say his name. But I'll kneel down.
He who shall not be named.
Yeah.
Has been signed to a minor league contract. Voldebo. Yeah. There you go. Of course, we have our pet peeves, interesting factoids, and of course, a quote of the month. As the doctor said, our next show will be on Friday, October 14th. And we are here the second Friday of every month.
Most of the time.
Occasionally the second Friday of every month. Of almost every month. So we got a lot to talk about today. I guess we have to start with our favorite whipping post, yawn. So Apple had some announcements.
Yes, and if you're an Apple fanboy, Apple did it again.
To be clear and for full disclosure, I have an iPhone. We are broadcasting on a Mac, but you are a 100% non-Apple user.
Android phone, Android watch,
right.
Windows laptop.
So do I have to defend Apple?
No. This one, there's nothing to defend. What did they announce? So the short answer, you wanted short answers, is nothing interesting.
So we can move on. Okay, so our next topic.
But quickly, dual cameras is neat. That it's beyond neat. If you're a serious photographer, Apple is stepping up its game with some class-leading capabilities with mobile photography, and that's noteworthy. Now, how many of you are serious enough photographers that this is game-changing, that says you're going to run out and get the phone and eschew your Nikon or Canon? Not too many, so it's interesting promise that most people really don't need. Then there's the controversial elimination of the headphone jack. And
something else to charge me.
Yeah, I generally use wireless capabilities, but you're right, it's another thing to charge. It's not an either or thing. But what I think is noteworthy, the reason why Apple introduced this now, perhaps a bit ahead of its time, because among other things, you won't be able to get your wireless earbuds for another month and a half after the phone is introduced. But the reason why they introduced it now, it's a classic, let's get the bad news out of the way. If this is a yawner of a product introduction cycle for Apple, and next year is going to be the biggie, that rather than have there be any negative news and commentary around, yeah, it's good, but they got the bad news out of the way. We're going to grumble a year from now. It'll either be widely accepted or we'll still be grumbling a little bit. But the bottom line is there won't be the fear and outrage that's coming around with this announcement. So they got the bad news out of the way this year so that next year it can be generally, wow, Apple did it again with a great new set of features and capabilities.
And there's enough there for the Apple fans to say, I'm getting an incremental upgrade. I get a little longer battery life. I got a better camera. It's water resistant.
Yeah, that's the interesting question, that Apple is seeing the aging of its user base. It used to be a higher percentage of their users were on newer products. If you're an Apple user and you've been holding off on an upgrade, is this enough to get you to upgrade? Or knowing that something great's coming a year from now, or you're going to tough it out for a year?
Well, ask me.
I am.
I have a 5S. How old is that? That's a 2-year-old phone.
So you're going to upgrade?
Nope.
Next year? Likely?
Likely.
Likely.
So I fit in that category.
Yeah.
No question.
And so this is...
And I'm making that decision for my whole family, because that would be 4 phones.
You're the home CIO.
That's right. CTO? CIO, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
CISO, you're a whole bunch of,
Lots of C's.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but your wife's
but not the CEO.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Marital bliss will remain for another month.
Okay.
The couple of things, kind of would Steve Jobs be rolling over in his grave kind of thing. Number one, the announcement got leaked early.
The tweets.
Yeah.
He never did Twitter.
I know, yeah.
So they finally get on Twitter and they have a gaffe. So their percentage of gaffes per tweet is really high.
Really high. Yeah. Off a small base. Yeah.
But that's a really high percentage.
Yeah.
But then again, they have no place to go. But better. But better.
Yeah. And it was leaked early on Amazon.
So it's a yawn.
Yeah.
Moving on. Let's talk about taking the internet back.
Yeah. Interesting. And the reason why I think it's germane, Tim Berners-Lee, and if you're not familiar with that name, you should be. He is the founder of the World Wide Web. It's Tim Berners-Lee at CERN, the Swiss institute, that came up with the notion of a browser and the World Wide Web and graphical representation and hyperlinking and so on. And he's the one who begat much of what we have today. And he recognizes a need to take things back. And before we went on the air, we were talking about the question of Facebook versus Google and who we thought was more vulnerable. And I posited that I thought Facebook actually was more vulnerable. And the reason being is, in the early days of social software, we talked a lot about the social graph. And that was how we are connected to everybody, our network of friends and colleagues, and the value that could bring as we transited our way across the internet. Somewhere along the way, as it always does, Facebook's selfish self-interest got in the way of its laudable long-term goal. And the selfish self-interest says, it's really hard to monetize infrastructure. So if this social graph makes for somebody's better experience on, say, TripAdvisor, how does that help us, Facebook? We're not sure how TripAdvisor is going to pay for that or whether they'll pay for that. So in fact, it's a risk if people spend their time on these other websites. What we really want them to do is spend all of their time on Facebook. And they've been massive in their success of that. They've got over 1 billion average daily users, and they now have 4 platforms with over 1 billion users per platform, including Messenger, which was the most recent one to cross the 1 billion threshold, and groups, and and so what's happened now is Tim Berners-Lee has said, to recognize that full value of what we originally wanted to do, what we need is something, he's come up with a couple of acronyms, SOLID and PODS. And SOLID is social linked data. And the whole idea is, let's have our social graph exist in a place controlled by us, not by some vendor who is monetizing it through selling us to advertisers.
We have to talk about vendor relationship management.
Yes,
yeah.
That this really is, we've talked in years gone by of the notion of vendor relationship management. And this is something that kind of takes CRM, customer relationship management, and flips it on its head. In CRM, the vendor owns the relationship with us, and they own the data.
They own the relationship because they own the data.
Yes, and they deign to share it with us and offer us, quote, value, even while they're maximizing their own return on that value. In vendor relationship management, we own the data, and we'll share it with merchants in trusted fashions who agree to offer us something of value in a trusted exchange.
Right.
And so, Solid, we own the data, and Pods, personal online data stores. So it resides on the internet in a way that's secure but shareable with merchants. That's where Berners-Lee thinks we need to take back control of the internet. And I think what we really want, if you say, what's Facebook good for? These days, 80% of what I'm spending, and it may be just a notion of the times, but is yelling at idiots about the current political state. And I'm not going to, say which my political leanings are, although if you're friends with me on Facebook, it's abundantly clear. But there's enough idiocy on both sides.
Yeah.
But that's what we're doing, in large measure, and we're sharing pictures of, cats and family, kids going back to school. We're not realizing anywhere near what the full expression of social could be and deliver value to us users. Right now we're being monetized and sold, and Facebook is getting a lot of billions of dollars.
We're randomly sharing information, and vendors are taking advantage of that for their own profit.
Yes.
It's not intentional sharing to get value.
Yeah, and the value exchange, on the one hand, yes, I maintain connection with friends that I might otherwise not maintain connection with. It's a good source of information, although we'll come back and talk about trending topics in a moment. But the bottom line is, I think the promise of social software that we all naively believed in the early days, even the pre-Facebook days, of what the social graph could mean, is clearly being perverted and bastardized by merchants and vendors who are capitalizing economically, and we are not recognizing the full value we as users could get. And if there's any one person who could make this happen and lead a revolution again,
well, that's
Berners-Lee.
My question is, yeah. What's the path to this? Is this an open source Linux type revolution? Is it a government-led?
No.
Is it
no.
Who are the entities that can have an impact?
Yeah, but the answer, from the open source perspective, effectively yes. And you know me, I am not the biggest fan of open source initiatives. But it's clear when you look at every vendor who's attempted to do this, when they start asking the question, how am I going to make money at it? They all recognize that we users are not going to pay explicitly, and therefore the only way they're going to be able to do it, and the quickest way they're going to be able to do it, is selling it to advertisers. So it cannot and will not be a vendor-led initiative. Therefore, it's got to be an activist user-led initiative. And those are harder to build, but I think that there's enough of a quick return in value. I believed in social software from the very beginning. I still believe in it. And I think, wrestling control of that back from Facebook is necessary.
So here's a question for you. So there was a time, and maybe it's not a valid analog, but there was a time when AOL was in a similar position to Facebook. AOL was the internet. AOL owned the experience even more than Facebook does. And yet now, if you say AOL, people just think of those coasters that they used to email and send you in the snail mail.
Yeah.
So is there a need for a open standard, or is it someone else waiting to eat Facebook's lunch?
I think there's the need for the open standard. Because if somebody to eat Facebook's lunch, they're going to likely do it the same fashion and ultimately sell out to advertisers. I don't see a coalition of vendors getting together and saying, we need to make this work, because you're just not going to get enough of them doing it together to make a dent. I think there's got to be a major, user-driven initiative that says, yes, here's the standard we're going to use to populate it. I'm going to do it, with a trusted authority. Who knows? This could be something that's done, using blockchain technology.
No, but for example, could it piggyback on something like medical records? So there's a need that individuals have their access to all of their medical records, and they carry it, and then they choose to share it with individual doctors. It's similar to vendor relation matter. Could it piggyback on an initiative that could be a nonprofit-led or government-led, and then create and then add to that?
The reason why I'm cautionary about that. So where have medical records gotten us? The answer is not very far, because it's a poor standard with contradictory, ill-defined objectives at odds with the way people behave in practice. So for all those, government-led.
I'm not supporting it. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I
feel like if there's something, that's where the innovation comes in, where it comes in on the heels or the coattails of some other initiative.
Yeah, but I think that the coattails, what we've often seen, and I would argue that large amounts of technology have followed the following path. There's been an early adoption, of a technology where we really reached and tried to go too far. Then somewhere we stepped back and said, we had a really nice solution and it's hit a wall. So an example might be some of the early PC networking. Really sophisticated things with PC networks. And then along came TCP/IP, and it was already around. But the whole idea was, let's not try and do everything. Let's try and do something much more manageable and just physically connect these devices. And because we were able to step back, solve some of the problems that stopped the further advance of the earlier, more ambitious technologies, we're able to embrace those very quickly, and then having established that common platform, build quickly on top of them. And I see parallels to that situation, that we had an early adoption of social platforms. We've reached, some of the limits of it and recognize them. Let's step back, do something more modest. But because we've had some of the learning experience, we'll be able to embrace that quickly and then build off of that new platform.
Right. I'm struggling to see that seed of adoption, that driver for adoption. That's, I guess, my challenge.
Yeah, and if I wanted,
there are a lot of people who tried to do open source social networks.
Yeah, I know. What is the network that for the brief period of time?
I can't remember.
Yeah.
What was it called?
Yeah, I don't remember. Yeah,
I think I still have the app on my phone. And the app wasn't even for them. It was a third-party app.
Yeah.
They didn't even have their own app.
Yeah.
I can't think of it.
But I think the climate is there, that there's so much pushback against Facebook. The privacy issues. We were kidding with WhatsApp. We really are going to share the data. That the conditions and Facebook's hubris and their dominance, while large in one perspective, they got 1 billion users. That's not the lead it used to be. Now they themselves have 4 platforms with 1 billion users. It's 1 billion ain't what it used to be. That sounds like a Yogi Berra.
All right. So speaking of Facebook, as long as we're talking about them, the automation versus people.
Yeah.
I think people are in the long term. Maybe they win the battle. They might lose the war, but maybe they won the battle. People are still relevant.
Yeah, and Alan's referring to what I mentioned a moment ago, trending topics. There was the furor a couple of months back that maybe Facebook was showing political bias, although that story turned out to be overstated. And so what Facebook said, well, okay, you want a better, fairer solution? We'll do it algorithmically. Now, 2 things. One, there's some recent stories, in the last couple of days that I've been reading, that say, of course, algorithms have built-in biases too. Saying it's done with an algorithm doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
And I don't know how often you look at Facebook trending topics. You know, I can't help but look at it with some regularity, and I've noticed.
But you also have a different interest. Part of it is
even if I separate out my academic use from my utility use, the trending topics is ridiculous now. One, instead of having some instructive blurb that has a name, I'm terminally unhip, so about a quarter of the names I don't even recognize what they are, and they're determined not by somebody with any editorial judgment, but how often they're being shared on Facebook, which means items of substance often are relegated very low on the list, and items of pop culture are surfaced to the top. And so Facebook can say, you know, the people have spoken. It's not me. The people have spoken.
Right.
And there's a side of me that says, I wonder if they've got a new Coke, old Coke kind of thing going. You know, if you're a conspiracy theorist who believes new Coke was all about getting people to want old Coke again, that automating it is all about getting people to say, okay, maybe having people make the judgment wasn't such a bad idea. You know, I mean, we live in an algorithm economy, and there are many, 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 many examples of where, you know, saying something's done algorithmically doesn't mean it's done well. And trending topics is not done well.
And to be topical, our electoral system is kind of like trending topics. We don't have popular vote for president. It goes through a biased system to determine.
Yes.
I'm stretching.
And I was going to say, and if the founding fathers, you know, part of the reason for that is they didn't trust the electorate. They were pretty wise guys.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, they anticipated 2016.
All right, moving on. We've talked about often Moore's law, and could it be that Moore's law, the foundation of computer technology, that's been when did he say this? It's got to be.
Probably in the 60s.
In the 60s. So for half a century, Moore's law
most of my life.
So now it's not a law. It's really more like a guideline.
Well,
it's like
in many ways, it was a guideline anyhow. So let's talk about what Moore's law is. Gordon Moore, one of the founders of Intel, posited that the number of transistors in a certain size could double every 18 months or so. And interestingly, it's not like it was a physical law. In some ways, it's what we refer to as a stalking horse. He put it out there, and lo and behold, discovered that when you put that stake in the ground, his engineers found a way to do it. You know, and so for 40, 50 years, we've been driven by that fact, and it's kind of, you know, the old observation, if Moore's law applied to cars, we'd have cars that could do, you know, 0 to 60 in a tenth of a second while getting 3 million miles per gallon. You know, and it's led to computers that, you know, I mean, you know, the power in this thing, you know, probably is more than the computing power in the world when Gordon Moore came up with Moore's law, you know, which is kind of shocking to think about. But what's happened is, you know, it's one of those things, kind of the speed of light, it's not just a good idea.
It's the law.
It's the law. You know,
that pesky physics, it just sort of gets in the way
of things. And we're reaching a point where there is kind of widespread belief that by about 2021, we won't be able to shrink these things anymore. You know, that we've reached the limits of miniaturization.
So would you say we need a quantum leap in technology?
I see what you've done there. You know, and Alan is making a sly reference to quantum computing, which our sophisticated audience, I'm sure, recognize. So I'm explaining it to my mother.
Right.
You know, but there are a couple of ways we're going to solve that. One is new approaches to computing, like quantum computing. One, we're going to have specialized chips. So instead of having a single microprocessor that does everything, we're going to have specialized components that optimize certain frequently done tasks, video processing and the like, so that we can continue to get performance gains along the scale of Moore's law, even while it's not going to come through the miniaturization of chips. I just love the fact that the speed of light is a gating factor on performance.
Well, look, it was for Wall Street too.
Yes, yes.
It was for Wall Street. There were people who are trading in Chicago and said, we're getting delayed executions on our trade because from Chicago to New York, that's too far.
There were people in Midtown saying that.
And then the people in Midtown. It's like, I need to be sitting right next to those stock exchange servers.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, and heat dissipation, what they're having to do with, because you put those things so close together, it generates massive amounts of heat. So how do we cool them? My son's got a liquid cooled desktop computer.
I had one at one point too.
Yeah.
Actually, my video card was liquid cooled.
Yeah.
My video controller. All right, moving on.
Kids ask your parents.
So we've talked a lot about, and it's been in the news. It started with Google. It's gone on to pretty much every auto manufacturer and their grandmother and their cousins. Autonomous cars.
Yep.
Driverless cars. We've talked here about the fact that it might be the wrong direction.
So to speak.
There've been the first incidents of accidents, and there's some challenges with it.
Yeah, there are a couple of ways. One, every time, and you know me, I'm normally the biggest tech cheerleader in the world. I haven't met an innovation I didn't like until I came to self-driving cars.
But you're also a car. You're a driver, though.
Yes, but
you're a driver.
But I can see through that.
Right.
That there are times I like driving. There are people who I don't like the fact that they have to drive because they do it badly.
Sometimes you want to have those turrets on the side of your car.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. A tank, what have you. Right. But there are a couple of reasons why I am not optimistic at all about autonomous cars in even the medium term. And the problem is the level of software sophistication required. A cautionary tale, the head of the National Transportation Safety Bureau came out and echoed a sentiment that I've believed, that if you look at airplanes, and airplanes on the one hand are a more complicated environment because we're dealing in 3 dimensions, not 2. But on the other hand, are a much easier environment because there's much less frequency, much more controlled environments, much more ability to safely recover from incidents. And yet we don't have self-flying planes right now. Yes, a lot of it's done on autopilot, but we require the pilot to be there and alert and aware for those situations that inevitably arise.
You mean if they have to flip the plane upside down and land in the Hudson? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, there are a lot of situations.
By the way, never go on vacation with Tom Hanks.
That's right. Yeah. Apollo 13. Captain Phillips.
And the one where he was on the island.
Yeah.
Castaway. Yeah. You just do not want to go on vacation with Tom Hanks. Okay.
Yeah. But there are a whole bunch of situations that I don't believe software can fully anticipate or compensate for. And I'd love to believe in the infallibility of software.
Well, it's the self-contained software that's the challenge.
Yes, that's one of the challenges.
Because you have self-contained software. An analogy that I was thinking of is Ethernet. Ethernet, each packet knows where it wants to go. And you get collisions unless you have routers. So you need a smart infrastructure in order for Ethernet to work.
Yeah, and we'll come back to smart infrastructure in a moment. But among other things, software, how often do your devices reboot?
I'm trying to make a call to you today, and boom, it rebooted.
Yeah, the phone rebooted. That's great when it's your phone. Okay, I called you back and said, I saw you called, what's going on? When your car reboots and you're driving at 80 miles an hour, nose to tail in traffic, that's not a good situation.
Well, the engineering standards for hardware and software are entirely different, and in general, the tolerance for bugs, for errors, for faults in software is so far away from what you would accept in a hardware.
Yes, and there are few more mission critical situations than a car, because there are a lot of things, even with hardware, it's like, okay, if the router goes down and my ability to check in passengers for an airline, it's like, okay, I've inconvenienced people, but nobody died.
Right.
There are very few situations where we've got, when this stuff goes down, that people die.
Right.
Yeah. This is one of those. And therefore, our ability to even understand.
You're driving in your car and you get the blue screen of death.
Yeah,
and it really
literally,
is. And it really is the blue screen of death.
Yeah. I'm sorry you're going to die. Yeah.
Right.
There are just so many issues there that I think are problematic. And the issue comes, to my way of thinking, is we've got in some ways a unfortunate economic system that allow me to go into an Ayn Randian kind of perfect environment where the government operated in an intelligent and foresightful fashion for the greater good, and we had a combination of smart infrastructure, smart cars, smart roads, that we could go a lot further along the way of delivering that system than the one where we've got independent parties like a Google or an Uber or car manufacturers or Silicon Valley, each of them trying to develop systems in isolation.
And separate standards. It's like the PC world back in the early 80s.
Even if they were all the same standard, I don't care. But the fact that they're competing with each other is problematic. There are certain things where, for a lot of years.
Look, if you own a Mercedes, you should have control no, never mind.
Do we want to differentiate?
My
my safe driving car is better than your safe driving car. It's part of the reason why security providers oftentimes don't highlight how they are relative to each other, because they recognize it's a losing game, and that they all share a common objective in building faith in the system.
Right.
But I think the smart infrastructure, smart car, smart road, central, brings us so much more benefit. But the problem is, we won't get governments to make significant smart infrastructure investments. One, at least here in the States, because anything that requires—
We don't make any infrastructure. Forget smart infrastructure. Have it just—
we're going to have self-driving on roads that are cratering. Build that into your smart driving car.
Right? That bridge just fell down.
Yeah. Or that pothole is going to cause— I'm going to hit it and I'm going to bounce off at a 37-degree. I mean,
so you have more detail about it when you hit the pothole.
Yeah, but there are things, for instance, with smart infrastructure that you can do. Interestingly, Audi has announced something where they're doing, we've got to have our TLAs, V2I, vehicle to infrastructure, where they're working with some communities where your Audi car will, when you pull up to a traffic light, you'll know how long the light, will be until it turns green. Now, not the most significant advance in the world, but there are a couple of things about that. One, it might cut down on people running lights and therefore causing accidents because they realize, oh, it's only 47 seconds away. I can wait that long. Number two, you can envision that being a feedback into a GPS algorithm that says, okay, I know if I go that way, I'm going to be stuck at that red light for 2.5 minutes. That one, even while it's a longer distance, it's only going to be a 45-second red light, So it can lead to more effective traffic flow. And in the same way, you can flip around and imagine how that would influence the lights. If I knew there were a whole bunch of cars coming this way, I might, okay, I'll back up a few, but then I'm going to turn green.
That's a rudimentary smart intelligent infrastructure.
Yeah.
Putting your analyst hat on, are these car manufacturers, are they driving the need for meaning driving? I shouldn't use that.
They're being really defensive. They hate this, because self-driving cars in the long run means fewer cars.
Right.
Yeah. So they all hate this, but they recognize, okay, we've got to at least be involved because we'd rather have 20% of a smaller market than 0% of a larger market. So I would say for the most part, they're making defensive investments.
They're looking at Kodak.
Yes, yes.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah, yeah. Except Kodak, film went to effectively 0. Yeah. Right. Cars aren't likely not to go to beam me up, Scotty. But that's still a little ways off. Although interestingly, it's been proven theoretically possible. I think it's been actually practically possible. Something was teleported. It was a microscopic distance of a microscopic particle, and to actually do a human being at distance would require more energy than is available in the world today. But
it's small details. Physics.
Yeah,
again.
Physics.
Physics just gets in the way.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of science fiction and physics, I've seen Terminator. I've seen RoboCop. I've seen all these dystopian views of the future. Well, you know what?
Maybe they weren't wrong.
Maybe they weren't. Killer robots.
Yeah, I read this. I forget where the article was. I sent you the link, and I don't think I included the link here. Yeah, but all these drones we've got out there, that there is in the very, very near future the capability to take a small quadcopter. You've seen the little toy drones we've got. That a small quadcopter, about 1 inch in diameter, can carry a 2-gram charge in it. Said 2-gram charge can punch a hole in 9 millimeters of steel. And basically, you can order these things from a Chinese drone manufacturer. You can fit about 3 million of them in a semi-trailer. Imagine, and it will have a camera that includes recognition software, so you can target it. Here's a picture of Alan. Go find them.
And even if 95% of them fail, I'm still done.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's in some ways kind of a truly terrifying vision of it's not going to be the Big Bang, but the death by 1,000 nibbles. Millions of these things on a tractor trailer, all of them with the ability to pierce steel. It's the next warfare. We're talking about autonomous drones, semi-autonomous drones. These are things that are pre-programmed, operating, purely on the internal software.
You know that it's something when they have an acronym for it.
Laws.
Lethal autonomous weapon systems.
Yeah. And we had one of the early discussions of the ethical issues of this in Dallas the other month with the police shooting, when they sent in a robot and exploded it near the shooter to take the shooter out. And it's like, okay, what are the ethics of that, but also the practicalities of when we can have machines killing humans.
And there are hackers who can take over machines.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It doesn't even have to be explosives. It can take over your car. We know that. We talked about that here. It can take over your house. It can take over your...
There is an internet-connected sniper rifle with intelligent software that they've demonstrated the ability to control it remotely.
So we should stay away from the windows.
Yeah, I mean, you know, but it's a scary capability, and you know, I'm not sure I've got any good answers to those kinds of things.
Well, I think that we all need portable EMPs, electromagnetic pulse devices.
Yes, or if it can pierce 9 millimeters of
like
scale.
they had in the Matrix. They had those in the Matrix. Right?
Yeah, yeah, but if it can pierce 9, I'm gonna, you know, wear 10.
Have you ever worn armor? That's heavy.
I've not. Have you ever worn a bulletproof vest?
That's heavy.
Yeah, yeah, that's heavy and isn't thick enough for what we're talking about here. Yeah, no, that's not fashion forward, not comfortable.
But I have an idea, because I could put myself in a concrete bunker with internet and VR, and I never have to leave. Right. Yeah. And Amazon will deliver me everything I want. I just have to make sure it puts it in a room separate, and I like EMP it before I
right
before I go in case.
Yeah, and you know, it's not air isolated, you know, so you're running risks. No, it's you know, the bad guys have a lot of things at their disposal, but this killer robot thing, you know, I read the story and it was, you know, truly terrifying. And I sometimes think one of the toughest things these days is being a science fiction writer. It used to be, I mean, Jules Verne was what, about 100 years ahead of his time?
Right, and then that gap is shrinking. Star Trek. I mean, flip phones.
Yeah, the tricorder. Yeah. So that might have been 40 years ahead of its time. And I think a lot of science fiction these days, you know, they're actually product planners, but they don't realize it. You know, I mean, the time from some of this stuff from concept to execution is less than a decade now. It's tough to be a science fiction writer.
All right, well, let's go on to more maybe upbeat. Let's talk about some interesting factoids.
Okay.
ESPN.
Yeah. You know, one of our favorite networks. Unknown factoid, I actually broadcast for ESPN in its first year of existence. I did a lacrosse game up at Cornell. That was the end of my, this audience knows well I do not have a face for TV.
A face for radio.
Yes, yes. As a program director in Plattsburgh, New York, politely pointed out, telling me I wasn't going to get the TV job. And Plattsburgh, let's just say, is not a top 100 market. He said, your assets are perhaps better leveraged on radio.
You have to write that down on your LinkedIn bio.
Yeah, and I said, you mean I've got a face for radio? And he kind of laughed and said, yeah, and the camera adds about 20 pounds to your appearance, and you don't need that. You must feel good sitting next to me. Yeah.
Hey, I also have the extra pounds from camera.
Yeah, but fewer than me, although proportionally. But anyhow, ESPN on a daily basis produces more than 60 petabytes of data. You know, it's gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes is the next one? Yeah, 60 petabytes of data a day. I'd sure like to be the sales rep for the storage. Yeah.
AWS.
Yeah.
AWS.
Yeah, a day.
This interesting factoid. All right, so for our friends down under, this is important.
Yes.
We need to know this.
Stand by. New Year's Day is coming. Hold on tight, because Australia will be moving 5.9 feet north on maps as of New Year's Day.
I feel the earth move.
Yeah. Those of you who are flying to Sydney will get there nanoseconds quicker. But the reason why they're moving 5.9 feet further north is plate movement. You know, they are actually moving relative to Asia, North America, and they're getting closer. And you know that cartography, things that depend on these kinds of things, having things be precisely in the location are important. And the reason why they're doing this, they're actually moving Australia to where it will be in 2020. One, so they don't have to do it all the time. And two, there's some cartographic changes coming in 2020 that what happens then will be locked down for some period of time. So they're in advance of that 2020, it's kind of like a Y2K bug thing. Okay, right. They got to get the location right and lock it in place. So 5.9 feet north as of New Year's Day.
So Freshdesk has an office in Sydney, and it's just going to move
a little bit closer.
A little bit closer. Phil Hassey, are you sure? You better be paying attention.
Yeah.
Ride-hailing apps.
Yeah. We all think, Uber is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I got my mother a smartphone. My mother's 89 years old, and got her a smartphone. Yeah. You watching, Ma? And I got her a smartphone because while she's still a car owner, she's not exactly comfortable driving. I'm not exactly comfortable having her drive. And so I got her a smartphone so she could use Uber, and it's been a wonderful thing. Uber ought to put her in a commercial because she said, she can't explain the sense of freedom it's given her. We all think about it. Only about 15% of Americans have actually used a ride-hailing app. And a third of them, I believe this was a Pew survey, a third of them don't know what we're talking about when we talk about Uber and ride-hailing apps. It's this echo chamber we've got here in the Northeast, in the Valley, and so on.
The big cities.
Yeah.
That's where the action is.
Yeah, but a third of people haven't even heard of Uber and ride-hailing.
All right, we have a new feature this week, which is called Interesting Questions, which I liked because I want to know the answers. We have the first interesting question, and I always think about this because there are myths and there are misinformation, and so now I need to know the answer. Should you always keep your phone fully charged?
And it used to be, back in the old NiCad battery days, you didn't want to keep your phone, keep recharging it because, what was known as the memory effect would,
Right, if you let it go down, like 10% and then charge it up, then you get that, and then you just lose the capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lithium ion, that memory effect went away, but there are things related to the cycling of the battery and the deleterious effects of heat on battery capacity over time that they basically recommend that you don't keep your phone charged at all times. Let it drain down. Now,
but not, I've seen don't get it down below a certain point.
Well, part of the problem with, that I don't know that that's an operational issue or a behavioral, what if you need it kind of
See,
issue.
This is hearsay. I heard, they tell me, people that if you let the battery go all the way down to 0, that's bad for the battery.
Yeah, that I don't recall reading about. But the short answer is you should let it drain down, and I'm not one of those ones who does it. But it also relates to your replacement cycle.
Well,
if the effects occur over several years.
So my philosophy of ABC, always be charging.
Yeah. I'm still not only always be charging. I carry an insane number of portable power solutions. That as devices have gotten miniaturized. Yeah, you're reaching for your Freshdesk battery. Yeah.
No, this is
come on, you can give the logo some airtime.
I don't have a Freshdesk battery.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Oh, that used to be your go-to device. But I carry an insane number. Although the one we were showing earlier, I've got kind of the new neat one that this is how many milliamp hours? This one's 5,000. So it'll charge the phone, a time and a half. It's got the USB port, but interestingly also, this is the Qi wireless charging standard as well. So I can charge my phone with the plug and my watch on the wireless pad and be able to
15,000.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got,
this will charge my phone like 5 times.
Yeah, as I said, I've got ones, like all sorts of ones, you know. My solar powered one that I keep in the car, I've discovered is more gimmick than reality. But to charge it via solar power requires more time than at least I'm spending away from electric.
So you're saying the answer to this question is maybe?
Well, the answer is you should run it down some. How far, I don't know.
Right, but then at the same time, realistically, you'll probably replace your phone before you realize the impact of it on your battery.
Yes.
All right, thanks. All right, this other question is one that I've got probably hundreds of times from customers when I was in the IT business. Maybe more, maybe thousands of times.
And I wonder if technology is changing this. The question is, should you leave your PC on all the time, overnight, what have you?
Right.
And
it's kind of like that fluorescent light thing too.
Yeah.
But I have an answer for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, but it used to be one of the considerations in favor of leaving it on all the time is a lot of the mechanical componentry is most likely to fail
on boot. Yeah.
Yeah, on boot when you apply charge to it. So your hard disk, you know, if it's spinning all the time, it's likely to be okay. Turn it on and off. But when I've got a solid state drive, that's no longer the issue. When I've got a fanless computer, that's no longer the issue. I'm at a point though where I leave it on all the time, having nothing to do with its operational capability and reliability, but because I've got so much software that's doing things automatically that if the device is off, it stops working. On the other hand, you know, more and more of my devices will operate autonomously and sync up at next time of connection. So my Amazon Echo, I just talk to it, and when if my phone is on, I get the information on the phone, you know, what have you. So, but I think we've reached a point where the mechanical considerations for turning off your computer, leaving it on, don't exist anymore. But the operational reasons and the cost, the incremental cost is near zero.
Well, at the same time, the definition of turning off is actually different, because you turn off your cable box, but it's still on. You turn off your television, but it's still on.
Yes.
Unless you unplug it, unless you cut the power to it. So there is that power use, and if that's a concern.
Your TV is listening in ways you don't know that it's doing that. And
tune in next week.
Well, not only your TV, New Jersey Transit recently acknowledged that it was listening in lots of situations and recording things because maybe they were listening for explosions. Lots of cities do that now for gunshot notification. But those things that are listening for gunshot notification are also picking up voices, and we don't know what their data retention policies are.
Right.
So yeah, you know, everything's listening. So leave your computer on. It's the one thing that's listening that may actually work in your behalf.
There you go. All right. Pet peeves. We got time for a couple. You have to share our favorite rail transit system.
Yeah. Well, Alan participates in this monthly.
No, weekly.
Weekly Twitter chat for customer service, #CustServe. And I happened to participate the night before last, and we were talking about what's the expectation of response to social media customer service situations. And I said, you know, a lot of businesses, I think the expectation is you should always be monitoring it, especially if you're in a 24/7 business. And I said, my worst example of this are vendors who respond to kudos. You say something nice about them and they retweet it or go, nice picture or something like that. But when you've got a customer service issue, crickets. And I said, my favorite example of that is Amtrak. As if on cue, Amtrak responded to my tweet saying, if you'd like to talk to us, call us at this number between 8 a.m. and 11 p.m. on weekdays. So in so many ways, it was a multiple level fail.
There was so many things wrong with that. It's like no context, automation gone wrong.
Yeah, and we're reinforcing the fact that even if you want to call us, you can't do it 24 hours. And then somebody tweeted to me about an even better example of their response. There was a situation 7 months ago. A person reached out on social media and said, hey, Amtrak, I'm stuck in the elevator at whatever train station it was. And fortunately, they relied on other channels to summons help.
As far as we know.
Well, yes, because they are no longer in the elevator.
Right.
But Amtrak replied to their tweet 7 months later,
and
going, I hope you're still not in the elevator.
No, they didn't even say that. They said, can we help you?
No, I thought it was, I hope you're still not in the elevator.
I think it was worse than that. I have to go back and look, but I think it was worse than that.
Yeah. But if you're going to do it, do it right. And some of this people, the customer service chat, there are people, if you set the proper expectation. No, there are certain situations where you can't set the expectation of no. You're in a 24-hour business.
Right.
My first peeve with Amtrak, I was taking an 11 o'clock train. Not ready to leave, The board's posting delayed. There are no Amtrak personnel nearby. The ticket windows are closed. The phone number is closed and they're not responding on social media. What kind of business is this?
Yeah. All right.
I still love Amtrak.
Well, it's a civilized way to travel short distances.
Yes. And that's damning with faint praise. It should be a great way of traveling intermediate businesses. Imagine a 3-hour train. We could do New York downtown to Chicago downtown in 4 hours.
Right.
But no, now we've got to go to the airport and try going to LaGuardia these days. Yeah, if Joe Biden thought it was a third world airport before, I think we're now down around fourth or fifth world status.
All right, we got time for one more quick pet peeve, and then we'll get to our quote of the month. I have always hated upgrades because rarely does anything good come out of upgrades.
Or I'd say good things come out of upgrades, but not in the first day or the first week. And I would say, I should know better. I should know better.
You should know better.
Yeah, but my phone requested an upgrade. And, in my defense, I didn't do it the first day. I waited till the third day, didn't see complaints about things, installed the upgrade, and for several hours, just reboot itself, and no predictability to it. And then somewhere along the way, I happened to be watching and I saw a notification that said some package had been decompressed. And it's like, wow, but it seems to have solved the problem. But there are a few don'ts. Don't install the upgrade on the first day, because whatever testing they've done.
You do not want to be the beta tester.
Yes, yeah. Don't buy a car in its first model year. No matter how much testing they've done, there are things when they put it in the hands of people, it's like, ooh, maybe we shouldn't have done it that way.
All right, our quote of the month. Doctor?
You prefer one to the other? Or
we got time for two.
Yeah.
We'll do 2 quotes this month.
Yeah. One of them, Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. Technological progress has merely provided us with more efficient means for going backwards. That's just one of my general observations about technology. The first thing we do is automate processes that were done inefficiently without asking, is this a process we even want to do in the first place? We eventually get around to it, and that's where a lot of the disruption comes in, when somebody finally says, what can we do that we haven't been able to do before? But yeah, there's also a lot of going backwards. And then I don't know who Mark Kennedy is. I didn't Google that. I don't, he's not John or Robert or any of their offspring. Right. But he said, all of the biggest technological inventions created by man, the airplane, the automobile, the computer, says little about his intelligence, but speaks volumes about his laziness. And
ambitiously lazy.
Yeah, and convenience is the one thing we've shown time and time again as a people that we're willing to pay for. And there are a whole bunch of, are we solving the problems at a societal level that we'd want to have solved? It's like, maybe not. But but things that make life easier for us, so that we can sit on the couch even more, and put on our virtual reality glasses and avoid the killer drones.
So on that note, thank you for joining us today. It's been part of my disruption. I'm Alan Berkson, the Dr. Disruptive, Jonathan Yarmis. We're here the second Friday of every month. Our next show will be on October 14th, where we expect to be in the middle of the baseball playoffs. Fingers crossed that we actually care about the games.
And our Jets, the first, hopefully they're not 0-6 at that point.
Right. Hopefully they're not mathematically eliminated from the playoffs by that point. Yeah.
And Tom Brady will be back.
You had to go there.
Thanks
for joining us.
Friends.
All right.